Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dr. Doctor, the show where no topic is too hot or too cold. Whether it's politics, religion, relationships, entertainment, or everyday life, you will be hearing from the experts. This show is not for the faint of heart or the faint of mind. But if you want to be inspired, you have come to the right place. And now, prepare to be enlightened as we introduce the host of Dr. Doctor, Dr. Peter Tassi, and his close advisor, Dr. Fooch.
Welcome once again to Dr. Doctor. Thanks for joining us again today, and we have another special guest with us today, Mario Lucci, another great Italian, say so myself. And as you know out there, I've said it before that I'm Italian, and we love having Italians on because us Italians have so many gifts. We're artistic, we're intelligent, and we're romantic. So we really know how to live life, treat women, and work hard. So today Mario Lucci is on, and he's going to talk about the trade of bricklaying and stonemason. If you heard previous podcasts, you know we've talked to a lawyer, an electrician, different trades, and today we're going to talk about stonemason work and bricklaying. So welcome, Mario, to Dr. Doctor. Now, I know you for a number of years, and you have the aptitude and ability to have done many things. Mm-hmm. You went to university. You are smart academically. You're a very creative man artistically. You've done so many things in your life. But as a young man, what I want to know is, what was it that attracted you to bricklaying and stonemason? You could have choose one of 100 trades or professions. What was it when you were young that caused you to go into that particular trade?
Basically, it was, desperation. I had recently got married, and I was in desperate need of employment. And one of my childhood friends had taken up bricklaying, and he had ventured out away from his employer to become self-employed, and he was desperately needing help, and I was desperately needing a job, having a young family and a home. And so I approached him about working for him, and he said he'd love to, have me as a laborer. And the first day on the job, after, slugging some bricks around and learning how to mix the mortar, he invited me to jump up on the wall and start laying bricks, which is very fortunate as far as the trade goes. Most laborers spend years being a laborer before they get the opportunity to attempt to become a mason. So I was quite fortunate where I was able to, hop up there on my first day on the job. And of course, I didn't lay very many bricks, but, I watched, and that's kind of how I started into the trade.
I see.
So that kind of, the idea of constructing anything can be very rewarding, I found. And so in the beginning, I was quite enthusiastic about what I had chosen to do with myself, even though it was physically demanding.
Demanding, yeah.
It was, something I was used to. I had a good work ethic as a young athlete, and I just took, what I knew as far as hardworking mindset and brought it to the job. And so in the beginning, it was working out quite well for me. And of course, the idea of doing things, I started working basically around the end of February in 1987. And by 1990, I had my own bricklaying business. So I learned quite a bit really fast, and that kind of got the ball rolling in the trade. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started. I needed a job.
Yeah,
And
it's important to maybe point out here that you were a great athlete, very powerful man. You played pro ball, and so maybe the hard work for you of bricklaying wasn't as hard as it would be for another person. Would you say that?
Well, when you have physical strength, it's a physical trade. As far as all the trades that go into the construction of a home, I would, consider masonry to be the most physical as far as having to, move thousands of bricks up to, the heights of a home. It was quite labor intensive. So as far as my training as an athlete, it certainly helped, the transition to continue to, work physically. I didn't have a problem with it at the time, when you're in your 20s. But, I also thought, I'm not sure I want to be doing this in my 60s because it was quite demanding. And so it's probably, the most physical job in construction as far as, getting a house bricked. It's depending on the height of the house. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into bricking a house.
Right. Yeah, you're setting up
Scaffolding,
mixing cement,
and you got to get all that up. Getting it all up in the air. It's, finding a good labor, they're worth their weight in gold. And when I started my business, I was very fortunate to have found a young Portuguese gentleman who I had known as from my coaching experience. He was a young man I coached, and that young man was worth, double his wage, the way his work ethic was. And
wow.
And he's now, has a crew of bricklayers. He's had a bricklaying business for 25 years. Wow. So we kind of got him started in the trade, and then when I got out of bricklaying, he went on to start his own company, and he's still quite busy and successful. But I mean, he is a testament to what you need to be good at that trade is you need to have a very good work ethic.
Yes.
There's no way around it. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. The years that you were laying brick, and you still do it here and there once in a while, freelance.
Yeah.
But did it meet your expectations? Like, was it fulfilling?
Well, I mean, as far as I remember my dad told me one time, and it always stuck with me, that he said it in Italian. He said, he said, don't you think that, having a trowel in your hand's a little out of place for someone with your education? And so I think what he was really getting at was, maybe you should think about working with your mind and not with your hands. And that kind of stuck with me as far as something that kind of, and I defended myself as far as, when he said that. I said, look, man, I got a family. I need to work. It's a job. I get paid well. It's hard work, but
yeah. But
there was something that it left kind of a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, because there was a lot of truth in what he said. That there is a certain rewarding feeling when you tear down that scaffold and look at what you've done, and the mastery and the beauty and of a house that's completely bricked. It's a beautiful thing when you're finished. Fulfilling for sure, but the amount of work that went into that job, I mean, I never had a problem getting to bed after a day of construction. That was exhausting.
Yeah.
So there's a line you need to draw as far as a trade is great. I mean, kids that work in the union now, they're making $50 an hour being masons, and that's really good money.
That is good money.
And so, and they're starving for people. Like I could go to the union hall today and become a mason with the union because they're really struggling with all of the older gentlemen that are retiring. Younger generation is not really in tune with physical labor as far as their, technology has taken over the young generation. So they're really becoming desperate as far as trying to find people to work in the trades. But yeah, there's a certain sense of fulfillment when you've completed a task. But as far as me personally, it's I didn't last long in business. The market kind of fell out. The building boom kind of crashed in the early 90s, and finding work had become a challenge, and that's when I left the trade as far as it being my primary source of income, and I started working with the school board as an educational assistant. So it's something that trades are probably the best thing to, learn. And as far as security, I can always find a job with a trade.
Yes.
So that's always, been in the back of my mind when, things were, if I was struggling financially, I could find a little brick job and, make pretty good money because there's just not a lot of people. It's supply and demand. And so as far as that trade, there's not a lot of people doing that work.
Right.
So you can basically set your own price when it comes to masonry repair and so yeah, it's great to have that ace in the hole,
Yes.
as far as the trade.
Now you're very creative as well. Did you, in terms of many things that you do in life, your other projects, would you say that this trade fulfilled some of your creative aspect? Because especially stonemasonry,
whenever you're doing, as far as bricking a house, you basically, there's a little bit of figuring out to do to make, the house, depending on the windows and the height, you have to do a little bit of figuring out as far as how much mortar between bricks to make things work out. The mortar bed, you work things out to make it work out, but as far as, when you're laying brick, there's not a lot of creativeness in laying brick. But when it comes to stone, especially natural stone, I had built a pillar at my house, and to me that's one of my greatest creative achievements was that pillar of natural stone, all granite. And I had to lay it only a foot at a time because the rock had to sit just right. So it took a lot of thinking and time, but in the end, it's just a beautiful piece of work.
Yeah,
I drive by it just.
I've seen your stone work; it's spectacular.
Yeah, and to me, that's when you can get creative when you're working with a natural stone where you're not really running off a line. It can be quite monotonous, the bricking of a residential home, because it's brick after brick after brick. It's one brick at a time, but you're basically just laying it on a line. There's not a lot to it, and so that's
there's not a lot to it in your mind because you're good at it. But I've seen people just put up a wall and the damn thing's crooked.
Wow, there's a lot.
It bows in and out. It's slight, but you could tell the bricklayers, they're bricklayers, but they didn't do a good job.
I can look at brickwork and tell you right away if the guy was a master or not.
Yes, exactly.
And that's those are things that when you start the job, that's when you make all those executive decisions on how to brick the house properly. As far as making the windows work with sills, and angle irons on top of windows. You have to measure. There's a lot of measuring going on when you're bricking a house. So staying on top of the intricacies of the trade are important to have a nice job. So yeah, there's a lot to it, but yeah, it's pretty simple too.
Yeah, I see what you mean. When you started, compared to today, like, how did they pay? Did they pay by brick laid, or did they pay by hour?
Yeah, when you're working for a builder, they'll pay you per brick. And then, when you're doing a repair, you're basically just pricing the job as far as, how much time and material, and you just kind of work out a price where you're making enough. But, as far as masonry, it's one of the only trades that technology hasn't really played a part in.
Right.
Basically a trowel and a hammer, a brush, and a tool to, tool the mortar in the joints. There's 4 tools in a level, 5 tools, and they've been around for centuries.
Centuries, since the time of the Romans.
And it's still the same thing. So the tools they were using basically to build a Colosseum look pretty much the same as the tools they're using today. So technology doesn't really not. It maybe played a role in mixing of the mortar and tow motor as far as lifting up skids of bricks to make life easier. But other than the laboring end of the trade itself is ancient.
Ancient, yes.
It's an ancient trade as far as masonry goes.
And we've seen people through the last couple thousand years always trying to perfect the cement that originally was, I think, designed by the Romans, but making that cement and mortar better.
Yeah, well, it's a basic mix of, a bag and 20 shovels of sand. It's kind of, you work on a 3-to-1 ratio between sand and mortar. So if you had 3 shovels of sand, it'd be 1 shovel of mortar. That's a basic recipe for mortar is 3-to-1. And that's kind of, the mortar itself has probably come a long way in the mixing. I mean, if you watch the 10 Commandments, they were making bricks, stomping on clay and straw.
Right.
A lot of things have come a long way as far as the manufacturing end of what we use. But it's an ancient trade as far as the world and construction of everything in the world. Masons have been. I marvel when I go to Europe and see the structures, even in Canada, the older structures of stone and the gables on top of churches, and I think about how these gentlemen, back at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, how they laid those stone, how they got the stone up there.
Exactly.
It's to me it's a marvel.
It is a marvel.
That the craftsmanship, 200 feet in the air, laying a stone on a peak of a church. It's incredible.
It's incredible, yeah. Getting back to the pay, you say it's always kind of paid well, unless you're in down times in the economy. But what can a young fella today or a woman expect in terms of pay if they became a bricklayer, stonemason?
Well, apparently my one of my good friends, actually the gentleman who gave me that first job, he went on to get out of business and work for the union. And so he's making around $50 an hour, $45 an hour with benefits.
Wow.
And his son, who's just out of college, decided he wanted to be a bricklayer. So he got him into the union. Like I said earlier, they're starving for young people to pick up the trade. And I think he's starting at like $29 an hour as an apprentice.
Oh, starting at that.
So that's a pretty good pay.
Yes.
As far as, most jobs nowadays are paying, minimum wage.
Right.
So when you're getting double minimum wage to start, that's pretty good pay for a kid.
Yeah, that is.
And so they have what's called a journeyman. So someone like myself, I could walk into the labor's union office and because of my history as a bricklayer, I could start at a $43 an hour wage because they would consider me what they call a journeyman.
Right.
And so once you pick up the trade and learn the trade, his pay goes up every year apparently. So every year in his apprenticeship, he gets a $5 an hour raise.
Wow.
So after 4 or 5 years, he's now making the same money as his dad.
Okay, so,
And that's good bucks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's...
Now, when you do freelance work, that's good work because you could, let's say you've done chimneys, you've done everything. So you go to someone's house, repair a chimney. Now you're not working for a company, you're working for yourself. And you got to tear down the chimney where the bricks have disintegrated or leaning or whatever. And you're going to build that chimney back up. Like in one day, you could make $1,000, $2,000, can't you?
Well, it's a little more labor intensive, as far as, the people with the home, if you price a job for $2,000 and anything high, there's
Yes,
danger pay.
of course,
Some of these chimneys are 6 or 7 scaffolds high.
Yes, very dangerous.
And so that's kind of, you have to put a lot of emphasis on the conditions of the job more than the job itself. So,
Absolutely. There's a lot of responsibility there.
yeah, and so that's each job is different, and as far as my personal experience with chimneys, going up in the air, the higher I go, the more I charge.
Exactly.
And so it's basically about the height of the chimney, and then depending on some of these old houses have chimneys that are massive, and if they want something like that rebuilt, I mean they could come into the $5,000 to $10,000 range depending on
Right.
the chimney and the home and what they want done.
Right.
So basically, pricing jobs it's tricky, and of course you can't do those alone. You can't go up 5, 6 scaffolds and then have to climb back down. You always need somebody to labor for you. So you gotta put their wage into the equation. But yeah, there's money to be made in masonry without question. Again, it's supply and demand. There's not a lot of people that do that.
Mm.
And so finding someone to repair something around your home, and I mean this area here, there's more brick in Hamilton, Wentworth than I think anywhere in North America. I mean,
right?
There are very few homes made of just wood, where
Yes.
you can travel around different places, but Hamilton is like it's probably got more bricks in Hamilton than anywhere else I've ever seen.
Yeah. Maybe a lot of that is the Western European immigrants that demand brick. Really,
Well, I
rather
think it was the English that kind of, England again is a bricky place also. When you go to the Northeast, you see a lot of these clapboard houses. You hardly see any brick houses.
Mm.
So you're traveling in Halifax, you're in the East Coast, there's nothing made of brick.
Interesting.
Basically just the chimneys. Very few houses are all brick.
Wow.
So it's a different type of construction up in Maine, up in Massachusetts, all the Northeast. You don't see brick like you see here. This city is built on steel and bricks, and there's a lot of brick in Hamilton. A lot.
Interesting. Now, of all the trades for young people today, bricklaying and stonemason being one, but what would there's money to be made, there's a good living to make for young people, but of all the trades, and you've done so many different things, I know you're versatile in many of the trades, but what trade would you recommend to young people, or trades?
Well, for me, what attracted me also to my trade that I chose was the idea of working outdoors. So, and the other idea that I found attractive was it was a seasonal job. So because I enjoy my time off, I like the idea of not working in the winter.
Right.
And I like the idea of working outdoors. So those two factors kind of contributed something of a passion for what I did, because I was, one, outside, and two, I could pick and choose when I worked, and I got the downtime that I always enjoyed.
Right.
So that's the thing about masonry for me. As far as recommending anything to anybody, basically it has to come from, everybody has their own sense of what they can see themselves doing. So a plumber and an electrician are guys who are working indoors. They're also all very well trained. Every trade is a good paying job.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, like I said, those were the attractions to me. And again, the physical labor I was never afraid of. Actually, I enjoyed it. Some people, like if the labor fell behind, I'd be the first guy to jump down off the wall to help them get caught up, because I enjoyed the physicality of the job.
I see.
It's something for me. I think it's a personal decision, as far as so the framers too were outdoor guys, and they were seasonal. So the idea of framing, a lot of my friends were framers. So I had friends that were bricklayers, and I had friends that were framers. My brothers were electricians, so I kind of got a taste of all kinds of trades,
right,
growing up. But like I said, it happened to be the one I fell into, and I took to it, and it is what it is. So as far as recommending a trade, I think that's a personal choice. I think that's something, somebody has an aptitude for certain things. They're quite simple, as far as, once you learn the basics of plumbing, you learn the basics of electrical, you learn how to read blueprints as a carpenter. There's not a lot to it, to any of them, really. It's a black and white wire in electrical.
Yeah.
And now plumbing has gone all plastic, so it's basically just running tubes through walls. And,
right.
Before you needed to learn how to solder, which is a very simple process.
Solder, yeah.
With the flux, and you sand, you flux,
yeah,
you heat.
You're cutting pipes.
Yeah, so there's not a lot to them. The thing is that because the world keeps growing, the trades never stop being in demand. So as far as a young person finding a trade, it's certainly a demand. It's just, again, having the aptitude to work with your hands and promoting that sense of physical labor is something. It's not for everybody.
Right. Absolutely.
And with technology taking over, my sense of the future is who's going to be doing this stuff when
that's the
these
problem.
Generations keep going in a different direction.
Yep.
There'll be a time when I can see a time in the future, not too distant future, where tradesmen are getting paid much like doctors and lawyers.
Yes.
Because, again, of supply and demand, there's just nobody willing and able. With technology taking over society.
Yes.
Young people, the phones are constant they're in their hands and they're in their minds. It's basically becoming, to me, it's going to be an issue in the next 50 years. As far
I've seen in developing countries, auto mechanics make more than doctors.
Yeah. And the days, I think, are gone. Like, there was a time when North America was built on immigration, and the immigrants that came here were all ready, willing, and able to work physically,
yes,
and work with their hands. The majority of immigrants that came from Europe in the 50s and 60s were people that were, peasants that came here looking for a better life and were willing to do anything to support their families. And so that kind of mindset, as the country grows, and the immigrants maybe that are arriving are not coming with the same work ethic that the ones that came from Europe brought here to develop this country. This country was built on immigrants' labor.
Yeah.
And so finding,
Absolutely.
you know, where does it go from here? I don't know. Would I recommend a trade to a young person? Definitely.
Yeah.
I would definitely think it's always a good thing to have, even if you start your life as a young adult in a trade and then find it's not for you. You always have that trade.
Right.
It never changes. You know.
Right. And over those initial years where you come to that discovery, you've made a good buck. Like
Yeah.
you've maybe saved enough money to go into the next thing that you want to go into.
You know, not too many jobs start at $28 an hour.
Absolutely not in this day and age.
Good
it
luck
doesn't.
finding that job. Where you're
No
going to
way.
start at that wage.
Yeah.
You know, usually that's the top end of your wage. So a guy working for the city is making $32 an hour, and he's been there for a while, and
Right.
and so like there's a lot of positive ideas in the sense of, you know, picking up a trade. And to me, I'd recommend it to anybody that's really not sure what they want to do, to really think hard about a trade,
Yes. Yes.
you know, because
Well,
there's a
that's-
market. There's a market.
There's a market. So I hope these young people listening will take heed of what you said and your advice and really start to move in the direction of trades. Mario, that was great. Thanks for joining us today on Dr. Doctor. I'm sure that you informed a lot of our listeners, and hopefully you inspired them to consider the trades and to move in that direction. So thanks for being here.
It's out there, and you know, they're waiting for you.
They're waiting.
They're waiting for you.
They're calling you.
They're calling. There's a calling out there. You know.
Yeah. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We wish you a good day and a great week.